Welcome back to the About Manchester podcast. Today we speak to Graham Mottershead, excavations manager at Salford Archaeology. As work began on the creation of the city's first new public park in 100 years, archaeologists from the University of Salford uncovered the remains of Manchester's historic Mayfield Baths.
First question really, Graham, were you expecting to find the baths?
We did know it was there because all this is done as part of the planning process.
Yeah.
A bit of other work happens before we go on site, and one of the main ones is a thing called a desk-based assessment, where we have guys look at all the historical background and everything, old maps, old photographs.
Yeah.
So what that does is that actually pinpoints on a commercial site areas of potential. So the Baths was an area of potential. So we knew it had been there. And then what we went to do initially was basically dig trenches to see if any of it had survived below ground. So we did expect it to be there, but what we didn't expect was it be in such a good condition.
Right, okay. What to you is the significance of the find, but both for Manchester or Greater Manchester historical study, but sort of the more generally UK wide?
It's quite a rare thing to see, really. As you can imagine, in the northwest in particular, the largest portion of the archaeology we do is these quite later industrial periods. So we do look at a lot of like workers' houses, factories, power systems from mills and stuff like that. So you see a lot of stuff, to do with all these industrial innovations in manufacturing. But what went hand in hand with that in the Industrial Revolution was big advances in sort of the sort of social aspect and society and things like that. And it was this, the slightly more sort of intangible things. So we often see these big engine beds, engine houses, boiler houses, things like that. But seeing something like this actually shows you the other things that were done at the time. The advances in public health and hygiene were very, very important. Because the people were living in, a lot of the people anyway, the poorer people were living in such terrible conditions with, tiny little substandard houses that were permanently damp, no sanitation, no running water, certainly no indoor toilets. They would have been served by outdoor toilets, which wouldn't even have been a single outdoor toilet per house. They served several houses. I mean, in fact, some of the worst examples were in Ancoats, where we know that there were certain areas where you'd have a single outside toilet serving 200 people. So you can imagine the conditions were so bad.
Absolutely, yeah.
Particularly cholera and typhoid. I mean, cholera in the 1820s, 1830s killed hundreds of thousands of people just in Britain. You go around Manchester, you see a lot of these small old cemeteries from the early 19th century, and most of them are just full of people that were killed by cholera.
When did they discover the link between cholera and the water supply?
Well, it was quite a lot later. They actually thought that it was all airborne.
Right.
So one of the things they started to do in, I think, the 1860s was when you had these crowded houses, was like knock through every third house. So it created a bit more ventilation. But they didn't think for a long time that actually this was to do with the fact that the water supply was so bad. So they thought everything was airborne. So a lot of the measures they put in initially didn't help. But the baths in particular was one example of these advances in hygiene, because the people living in these conditions literally didn't have anywhere to wash themselves, their clothes, their bedding. They certainly couldn't have dried clothes and bedding because the houses were permanently damp anyway.
Yeah.
So these things were built, we think of them as swimming baths.
Yeah.
And they were used as that, but primarily their function was hygiene and cleanliness. And they all had laundries attached to them. So
right.
People could go and wash the clothes and their bedding and also clean themselves while they were there.
How many of these do we know were around the Greater Manchester area? Have you any idea?
There will be. I couldn't tell you exactly how many off the top of my head. I know the first one in Manchester was on Miller Street, pretty much around where the new co-op headquarters is.
Yeah.
We actually excavated that about 5 or 6 years ago.
I remember. I went down to see it. I seem to remember.
Oh, right.
Doing it. Yeah.
We've done a few. We've dug another one at Leaf Street in Hume a few years ago.
Yeah.
That was an early one as well. I think the first one, the Miller Street one, was 1842. I can't remember the date of the Leaf Street one. I think that was late 1840s. The Mayfield one was 1853, I think.
Right. Okay.
So there were a few. It sort of built up. I think the first one in Britain was in Liverpool in the 1830s.
Right.
And it kind of spread from there. So eventually there were quite a lot. By the time you get to the 1890s, when Victoria Baths was built, for example, there were quite a lot of them. Yeah.
And what was it? Did people sort of go as a family down there? Was it sort of almost like a day outing that the whole family would go down and do the laundry and get washed and maybe swim?
Yeah, I think it would have been like that. Certainly, it probably. I mean, for the kids at least, it would have been something they looked forward to. We know that Poulton, who's one of the guys that ran it, began quite early giving swimming lessons. He was a very keen swimmer, and he used to do all these sort of crazy underwater stunts and things like this.
Okay.
And I'm sure there's records. One of his stunts was he used to drink pints of milk underwater.
How could you possibly do that? I'm trying to visualize that.
Yeah. But he was giving swimming lessons as well at the time. So I think it would have been quite some of at least the kids look forward to.
So were these paid for by sort of private entrepreneurs, philanthropists, or were they funded by the local government at the time?
Initially, for 1830s, 1840s, they were paid for by independent private companies and individuals. I know the Leaf Street Baths and Mayfield Baths as well, plus several others. Collier Street Baths, for example, in Salford. They were all built by I think it was the Manchester and Salford Bath and Laundry Company.
Okay.
It was quite interesting because it was mainly it was used by poor people. It was also used by the middle classes a lot, and the push for actually building them came from the middle classes. They were welcomed by the poorer working class who used it quite gladly, but the working classes, they didn't do it so much out of philanthropy. They did it more out of the fact that they got sick of catching the nasty diseases from the poor.
Okay.
So they made this push for hygiene for the poorer people, so it will make things better. And it took a good 40 years at least before the councils and the local authorities actually caught onto the idea and started doing it themselves.
Okay. And do we know how long the baths was there and when it finally closed down?
It was, as I say, it was built in about 1853. I have a feeling it went out of use around the Second World War.
Okay.
The building was still there until I think the late 1950s.
Right.
So it was there for about 100 years, and most of that time it operated as a baths and a laundry.
Gosh, I wasn't expecting you to say for that long. I thought you were going to tell me the answer to that was going to be about 1900 or something like that. So
no. So they were very popular for a long, long time.
Right.
I mean, I know Leaf Street Baths was, if I remember rightly, was still in use as a swimming pool in the 1970s.
Gosh. Okay. Didn't know that. Gosh. Okay. How are you going to document the site? And obviously, this is going to all get built over. So what are the plans to sort of keep it in history?
Well, that's one of the main reasons we're there. Say it's part of the planning process. So obviously, to get the planning permission, the developer has various planning conditions put on their permission. One of which is archaeology.
Yeah.
So they're basically paying us to record all this stuff before it's gone,
Okay.
find out what's there, and then when there is anything significant there, we do what's or it used to be called preservation by record.
Okay.
So we effectively completely record absolutely everything, and then we'll write a report on that. There'll likely be a publication on it.
Okay.
And that kind of, then it can be sort of removed because we've preserved the knowledge of it, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would point out that the fabric, a lot of the fabric of the baths has actually been kept, and the main developer on the site, U&I Group, they've actually got architects currently designing reuse of the fabric into the Poulton building, which is going to go over where the baths was.
Oh, right, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, they actually, particularly the tiles,
Mm-hmm.
they brought in a specialist company who could cut sections of the tiles out. Well, cut the tiles out in sections without damaging them.
Right. Oh gosh. Okay. That'll be interesting to see when that's up and built. Are you expecting other finds there, or
well, yeah,
you know about or you don't know about at the moment?
Yeah, well, we've already, as well as the baths. At the same time we were excavating the baths, we also excavated the Ardwick Tannery and the Mayfield Dye Works, which were on the site. The Dye Works in particular is very important because it's one of the earliest. Well, it's called the Mayfield Dye Works. It was actually a print. I think it was originally a dye works and then a print works. It's one of the earliest print works in Manchester, and it was. When people say about the Mayfield area being called the city within a city, it's because there were so many big industrial plants on there for textiles, dyeing, bleaching, tanning, printing, doing all this kind of thing, textile works, all sort of together in one area, and they were all very advanced for the time. So
right.
The local authorities, if they had visitors, say heads of state from other countries, they bring them to see Mayfield, which would have been pretty grim. But it was, you know, in terms of sort of the application of industry, it was a really major thing, and Mayfield Dye Works was a really major part of that.
All right. Was that for dyeing? Was that sort of dyeing textiles?
Creating dyes for cloth, and then when I say print works, it was not like printing newspapers; it's printing coloured patterns and so on onto cloth.
Right. Okay.
Getting the dye onto the cloth. That's what the print works did. And
presumably the reason that area was chosen was what would have then been the fast-running Medlock River, I would imagine. Is that right?
Yeah. That's a very good reason for them to use it. You can see on there's maps that date back to the late 18th century, where you can see the beginnings of the factories there, and all of them are built along the river so they can utilise the water.
Right.
Not only that, they will have been putting all the stuff from the factories back into the river, so it will have been pretty grim itself at the time.
I can imagine. What? Just you might not know the answer to this. What are they going to do with Are they going to open up all the river there? Is that part of the plan?
Yeah, they're actually in the process of really cleaning it up at the moment.
Right.
Yeah, they're going to open it up. It's going to be a major feature running through the park. I think they've done a lot of work already in cleaning it up. It's better than it was.
Okay. Oh, that's good news. Okay, that's lovely. Graham, is there anything else you'd like to add? Have I missed anything you want to talk about? Or
no, I think you've covered most things there.